Mercy Jennings knew that kindness could be dangerous in a place like White Pine, Colorado. The year was 1876, and as she knelt in the dust of Main Street beside a fallen elderly Ute woman who had come to town to trade, she could feel the disapproving glares boring into her back like hot pokers. The old woman had collapsed under the merciless summer sun, her small collection of hand-woven baskets scattered around her. Without hesitation, Mercy had rushed from the general store to help, offering her water canteen and a gentle hand. "Get away from that savage," a voice called from the gathering crowd. It was Vernon Pike, the saloon owner and self-appointed moral guardian of White Pine. His shadow fell across Mercy as she helped the woman drink. "She's just an old woman who needs water," Mercy replied, not bothering to look up. "The heat today would fell a horse." Vernon's response was to spit, the glob of tobacco-stained saliva landing mere inches from Mercy's skirt. "You're as bad as they are, Mercy Jennings, always helping those who don't deserve it." Mercy continued her ministrations, helping the woman sit up. "Thank you," the elderly woman whispered in halting English. "Filthy Indian lover," Vernon muttered loud enough for all to hear, and before Mercy could react, he spat again, this time hitting her shoulder, the brown stain spreading across her blue calico dress. A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. Mercy froze, mortification burning her cheeks, but she didn't move away from the woman she was helping. "That's enough, Pike." The deep voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd. A tall figure stepped forward, his spurs jingling with each deliberate step. Mercy recognized him as Forrest Quinn, a cowboy who worked for the Rocking M Ranch outside of town. He wasn't from White Pine originally, had only been around for about 8 months and kept mostly to himself. Forrest positioned himself between Mercy and Vernon, his hand resting casually on his holstered Colt. "The ladies showing basic Christian decency. Something you seem to have misplaced along with your manners." Vernon's face reddened. "Stay out of this, Quinn. This ain't your business." "You spitting on a lady made it my business." Forrest's voice remained level, but there was steel beneath the calm. He turned slightly, keeping Vernon in his sight while addressing Mercy. "Miss Jennings, you all right?" Mercy nodded, helping the elderly woman to her feet. "I'm fine, Mr. Quinn." Vernon scoffed. "She gets spat on because she's too kind to those who'd scalp us in our sleep, and you're defending her." Forrest's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Then kindness is the bravest thing left in this sorry excuse for a town." He turned fully to Mercy. "Need help getting her somewhere to rest?" Vernon stalked away, muttering curses while the crowd began to disperse, the entertainment over. Mercy felt the sting of their judgment as she accepted Forrest's offer, guiding the elderly woman toward Dr. Holloway's office at the end of the street. "My name White Feather," the woman offered as they walked slowly. "I thank you." "You're welcome, White Feather," Mercy replied softly. "I'm sorry for how you were treated." Forrest walked beside them, his tall frame providing a shield from curious onlookers. "Folks around here have long memories about the Troubles," he said quietly. "Doesn't excuse it, though." Mercy studied him from the corner of her eye. Forrest Quinn was a man of contradictions. His weathered face and calloused hands spoke of hard work and harder living. Yet there was a gentleness in how he helped support White Feather's other side. His dark hair was longer than most men wore it, brushing his collar, and his face was tanned from long days in the saddle. "Thank you for stepping in," Mercy said as they reached the doctor's small office. "Most wouldn't have." Forrest simply nodded, "Didn't do it for thanks." He hesitated, then added, "What you did took courage, Miss Jennings. Real courage." Something in his tone made Mercy look up and meet his gaze directly. His eyes were a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, and for a moment she felt as though he was seeing right through to her soul. "I just did what was right," she replied. "That's what makes it brave." He tipped his hat and stepped back. "I'll leave you ladies with the doctor. Good day, Miss Jennings." As he walked away, Mercy couldn't help but wonder about the quiet cowboy who had defended her when no one else would. She had a feeling their paths would cross again, though she couldn't have imagined just how soon or under what circumstances. Mercy lived alone in a small house at the edge of town that had belonged to her parents before influenza took them both 3 years prior. At 22, she supported herself by working at the town's only schoolhouse and by selling baked goods to Hargrove's general store. It wasn't an easy life, but it was hers, and she had fought hard to maintain her independence when many thought a young woman should either remarry or move in with relatives. After helping White Feather, Mercy walked home with her basket of supplies, her shoulders still damp from where she tried to wash out Vernon's spittle. The encounter had left her shaken, not just from the public humiliation, but from the realization of how deeply the prejudice ran in White Pine, a town she'd lived in her entire life. As she rounded the bend toward her small house, she noticed smoke rising from her chimney. Mercy froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd left no fire burning when she went to town that morning. Cautiously, she approached her own home, setting her basket down by the garden gate. Through the window, she could see figures moving inside. For a moment, she considered running to fetch Sheriff Briggs, but the nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile away, and the sheriff's office was back in town. Taking a deep breath, Mercy picked up the heavy wooden rake that leaned against her porch and crept toward her front door. Just as she reached for the handle, the door swung open, revealing Vernon Pike and 2 of his saloon cronies. "Well, look who's finally home," Vernon sneered. "The Indian lover herself." Mercy gripped the rake tighter. "Get out of my house, Vernon." The men laughed, and Mercy noticed with horror that they'd ransacked her small home. Books lay scattered on the floor, and her mother's china teapot lay shattered by the hearth. "We thought we'd teach you a lesson about where your loyalties should lie," Vernon said, stepping toward her. Mercy raised the rake. "I'll scream, Mrs. Tanner will hear me." "Old widow Tanner's deaf as a post," one of the other men chuckled. "Nobody's coming to help you, Miss Mercy." Vernon reached for her arm, and Mercy swung the rake, catching him across the chest. He cursed, grabbing the implement and wrenching it from her grasp with such force that she stumbled backward off the porch, landing hard on the packed earth of her yard. "You'll regret that," Vernon growled, advancing on her. The sound of a rifle being cocked froze everyone in place. "I believe the lady asked you to leave." Forrest Quinn sat atop his chestnut gelding at the edge of Mercy's property, a Winchester rifle aimed steadily at Vernon's chest. "This ain't your fight, Quinn," Vernon said, though he had stopped moving toward Mercy. "I'm making it my fight." Forrest's voice was calm, but his eyes were hard as flint. "Now, you boys are going to turn around, get on your horses, and ride away. And if I ever hear of you bothering Miss Jennings again, we'll have a different kind of conversation." For a tense moment, Mercy thought Vernon might challenge him, but something in Forrest's expression must have convinced him otherwise. With a final glare at Mercy, Vernon signaled to his companions, and they skirted around the yard to where their horses were tethered behind her house. "This isn't over," Vernon muttered as he mounted. "For your sake, it better be," Forrest replied, not lowering his rifle until the men had ridden away. Only then did he dismount and approach Mercy, who was still sitting in the dirt, trying to catch her breath. He offered her his hand, and she took it, allowing him to help her to her feet. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. Mercy shook her head, brushing dirt from her skirt. "Just my pride." She looked toward her open door, seeing the destruction inside. "And my home." Forrest followed her gaze. "I was riding by when I saw them enter. Should have stopped them sooner, but I wasn't sure what was happening until I saw you return." "Why were you riding by?" Mercy asked, suddenly suspicious. Her house wasn't on the way to anywhere in particular. A faint flush crept up from beneath Forrest's collar. "Thought you might need checking on after what happened in town." He cleared his throat. "Folks like Pike don't take kindly to being shown up." Mercy nodded, accepting his explanation. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn." "That's twice today you've come to my rescue, Forrest," he said. "Mr. Quinn was my father." "Forrest," she repeated, offering a small smile. "I'm Mercy." He nodded, then gestured toward her house. "Let me help you clean up." Mercy hesitated only briefly before nodding. Together, they entered her small home, and she saw the full extent of the damage. While nothing of real value had been taken, the men had done their best to make their displeasure known. Books had been tossed from shelves, flour had been dumped across her kitchen floor, and her carefully tended herbs had been scattered. "I don't understand such meanness," she said softly, kneeling to gather the pages of a book whose binding had been broken. Forrest set his rifle by the door and removed his hat. Some men feel powerful only when they're making others feel small. He began picking up scattered items. "I've known too many like Pike." They worked in companionable silence for a time, restoring order to her small home. Mercy found herself watching Forrest when he wasn't looking, the careful way he handled her belongings, the quiet efficiency of his movements. He was a man used to solving problems without fuss. "Why did you help me?" she asked finally, as they swept the last of the flour into a dustpan. In town with White Feather, most men would have looked the other way. Forrest paused, leaning on the broom. "I was raised to believe that how you treat those who can't help you shows your true character." He met her eyes. "What you did for that woman, it reminded me of someone I used to know." Something in his tone told Mercy there was more to the story, but she didn't press. Instead, she moved to the stove. "Let me make you some coffee, at least, as thanks." He nodded, and Mercy busied herself with the coffee pot, aware of his presence behind her as he continued straightening her small sitting room. "You live here alone?" he asked. "Since my parents passed, yes." She measured coffee grounds carefully. "The town thought I should sell and move in with my aunt in Denver, but this is my home." "Takes courage to stand your ground," Forrest observed. Mercy turned to face him. "Is that why you defended me? Because you thought it was courageous to help White Feather?" "I defended you because it was right," he replied simply. "And because what Pike did was wrong." The coffee began to bubble, and Mercy poured 2 cups, handing one to Forrest. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and she felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. "How long have you worked for the Rockingham?" she asked, changing the subject. "About 8 months," he replied, sipping the strong coffee appreciatively. "Came west from Missouri last year, worked my way through Kansas, then up to Colorado. You're a long way from home." A shadow crossed his face. Home is where you make it these days. Before Mercy could inquire further, they heard hoofbeats approaching. Forrest was immediately alert, moving to the window with his hand on his holstered gun. "It's Sheriff Briggs," he reported, relaxing slightly. The sheriff was a portly man with a walrus mustache who'd held his position more through lack of competition than any particular aptitude for law enforcement. He dismounted heavily and approached the house, eyeing Forrest's horse tethered nearby with suspicion. "Afternoon, Miss Jennings," he called, touching the brim of his hat. "Got word there might be some trouble out here." Mercy opened the door. "There was, Sheriff. Vernon Pike and 2 of his friends broke into my home and ransacked it." Sheriff Briggs frowned, glancing past her to where Forrest stood. "And what's your part in this, Quinn?" "Mr. Quinn came to my aid," Mercy said firmly. "If not for him, I might have been hurt." The sheriff looked unconvinced. Pike's saying differently. "Says Quinn here threatened him without provocation when he was just paying a social call." Mercy's temper flared. "A social call? They destroyed my property and threatened me. Look around you, Sheriff." Briggs stepped inside, surveying the recently tidied room. "Doesn't look too bad to me." "Because we've spent the last hour cleaning it," Forrest said, his voice level but edged with frustration. "We?" The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "Mighty familiar for a ranch hand to be in a single lady's home, wouldn't you say?" Mercy bristled. "Mr. Quinn has been nothing but a gentleman, which is more than I can say for Vernon Pike or for you, Sheriff, if you're implying anything improper." Sheriff Briggs held up his hands placatingly. Now, Miss Jennings, I'm just doing my job." "Pike's a respected businessman in town, and his story is a lie," Forrest interrupted flatly. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Quinn, you're new around here. Don't have the standing Pike does." "Standing doesn't make a man honest," Forrest replied. Briggs sighed, looking at Mercy. Look, Miss Jennings, I know you've been through a rough day. First that business with the Indian woman in town, now this. Maybe it would be best if you reconsidered your aunt's offer. A young woman alone. I'm not leaving my home because Vernon Pike has a grudge, Mercy stated firmly. Well, I can't post a deputy here to protect you, Briggs said, and I'd advise against having visitors. He glanced meaningfully at Forrest. Gives the wrong impression. Mercy felt her cheeks heat with indignation, but before she could respond, Forrest spoke. I'll be on my way, Sheriff, he said calmly. Just wanted to make sure Miss Jennings was safe. He turned to Mercy. Thank you for the coffee, Miss Jennings. She nodded, reluctant to see him go but understanding the position they were in. Thank you for your help, Mr. Quinn. Forrest retrieved his rifle and hat, nodding to the sheriff as he passed. Mercy watched from the doorway as he mounted his horse with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. I'll check on you tomorrow, he called, tipping his hat before turning his horse toward the road. Sheriff Briggs watched him go with a frown. That man's going to be trouble, mark my words. He doesn't know his place. Mercy turned a cold gaze on the sheriff. And what place would that be, Sheriff Briggs? The place where good men stand by while others commit wrongdoing. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably under her stare. Just be careful, Miss Jennings. Pike has friends in this town. And I don't, she asked quietly. Briggs didn't answer directly. I'll have a word with Pike, tell him to leave you be, but you might want to consider being more selective in who you help and who you associate with. He tipped his hat and took his leave, mounting his horse with considerably less grace than Forrest had shown. Alone in her doorway, Mercy watched the sheriff ride away, a sense of isolation settling over her. For the first time since her parents' deaths, she questioned whether she truly belonged in White Pine. But beneath that doubt was a spark of something else, the memory of Forrest Quinn's steady blue gaze and his quiet declaration. Then kindness is the bravest thing left. With renewed determination, Mercy closed her door, bolted it securely, and began planning for tomorrow. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same courage that had guided her all along. The following morning, Mercy rose earlier than usual, her sleep having been fitful and disturbed by dreams of Vernon Pike's sneering face. She had school to teach, having taken over the position after Miss Abernathy had left to get married the previous year. The one-room schoolhouse sat on the east edge of town, and usually Mercy looked forward to her days with the children of White Pine. Today, however, she approached her duties with trepidation. Word would have spread about yesterday's events, and she wasn't sure what reception awaited her. As she neared the schoolhouse, she saw several of her students already waiting on the steps, their faces lighting up when they spotted her. Miss Jennings, little Emma Wilcox called, waving enthusiastically. At 8 years old, Emma was one of Mercy's brightest pupils, and her unguarded affection was a balm to Mercy's wounded spirit. Good morning, children, Mercy greeted them, unlocking the schoolhouse door. As the children filed in, Mercy noticed that 2 were missing, the Henderson boys, whose father worked at Vernon's saloon. Her heart sank, but she maintained her smile as she called the class to order. The morning passed without incident, though Mercy caught several of the older children whispering when they thought she wasn't looking. At midday recess, as the children played in the yard, Mercy sat on the steps, watching them and eating her simple lunch of bread and cheese. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't notice the approach of a rider until his shadow fell across her. Looking up, she was surprised to see Forrest Quinn atop his chestnut gelding. "Mr. Quinn," she said, standing quickly and brushing crumbs from her skirt. "Miss Jennings." He tipped his hat. "Thought I'd make good on my promise to check on you." Mercy was acutely aware of the curious stares from her students, who had stopped their games to observe this unexpected visitor. "I'm quite well, thank you," she said, keeping her voice formal for the benefit of the watching children. Forrest seemed to understand her caution, for he remained atop his horse, maintaining a proper distance. "Glad to hear it." He glanced at the curious faces of her students. "Seems you have your hands full," Mercy smiled. Teaching has its challenges, but it's rewarding work. Forrest nodded, then reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. Found this at the trading post this morning. Thought you might have use for it. Curious, Mercy accepted the package and carefully unwrapped it to find a small revolver, a .32 caliber Smith & Wesson from what she could tell. "Mr. Quinn," she said, keeping her voice low. "I don't know if I can, it's not charity," he interrupted gently. "It's practicality. A woman alone should be able to protect herself." Mercy hesitated, then rewrapped the gun and tucked it into her pocket. "Thank you," she said sincerely, "though I pray I never need to use it." "As do I," Forrest agreed. He glanced toward town, his expression turning more serious. "I spoke with my foreman this morning. He's agreed to let me camp at the edge of your property for a few nights, just until things settle down with Pike, if that meets with your approval." Mercy was touched by his concern, though she knew such an arrangement would only fuel the gossips of White Pine. "That's very kind, but I'd stay well away from the house," Forrest clarified quickly. "Just close enough to hear if there's trouble. No one need know I'm there." She considered his offer, weighing propriety against safety. After yesterday's encounter with Vernon and his cronies, she couldn't deny that having someone nearby brought a measure of comfort. "Very well," she agreed finally, "but please be discreet." Forrest nodded, his expression relaxing slightly. "I'll ride out after sundown." He tipped his hat again. "Good day, Miss Jennings." As he rode away, Mercy became aware of a presence beside her. Emma Wilcox stood there, her freckled face full of curiosity. "Is that your beau, Miss Jennings?" The little girl asked innocently. Mercy felt her cheeks warm. "No, Emma, Mr. Quinn is just a friend." Emma looked unconvinced. "My ma says he's a drifter and not to be trusted, but Pa says he's the best horse breaker the Rockingham ever hired." "Your father is right about his skills with horses," Mercy said carefully. "As for the rest, I think Mr. Quinn is a man of good character." Emma nodded solemnly. "I think so too. He looks at you like Pa looks at Ma." Before Mercy could formulate a response to this startling observation, the church bell rang, signaling the end of recess. Emma skipped away to join the other children, leaving Mercy to ponder her words. The afternoon lessons proceeded without incident, though Mercy found her thoughts repeatedly drifting to Forrest Quinn and his unexpected gift. She had never fired a gun, though her father had owned a rifle for hunting. The weight of the revolver in her pocket was both reassuring and disquieting. As school ended and the children dispersed to their homes, Mercy remained behind to prepare lessons for the following day. The schoolhouse was quiet save for the scratching of her pen and the occasional creak of the wooden building settling. She was so absorbed in her work that the sound of the door opening startled her. Looking up, she expected to see a student who had forgotten something. Instead, Vernon Pike stood in the doorway, his bulky frame blocking the afternoon light. "Working late, Miss Jennings?" he asked, his voice falsely pleasant. Mercy rose slowly, acutely aware that they were alone in the schoolhouse. Her hand moved instinctively to her pocket where the revolver lay hidden. "What do you want, Vernon?" she asked, keeping the desk between them. He stepped further into the room, closing the door behind him. "Just came to have a friendly chat, clear the air after our misunderstanding yesterday. Breaking into my home and destroying my property isn't a misunderstanding," Mercy replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Vernon's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Now, Mercy, you know how things can get blown out of proportion. I was concerned about you after that business with the Indian woman. Thought you might need some guidance from those who know better." "I don't need your kind of guidance," Mercy said firmly. "Please leave. I have work to finish." Vernon moved closer, running his fingers along the edge of one of the student desks. "You know, I've always admired your spirit, Mercy, ever since you were a girl. Your father and I used to talk about what a fine woman you'd grow into." His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. He wasn't wrong. Mercy's grip tightened on the revolver in her pocket. "My father would be ashamed of how you've behaved, Vernon. He considered you a friend." Something dark flashed in Vernon's eyes. Your father understood the natural order of things. Indians are savages and decent white women don't consort with them or with drifters who defend them. Mr. Quinn was simply being a gentleman, Mercy said. Something you might take instruction in. Vernon's face hardened. That drifter's gotten under your skin, hasn't he? What would your father say about that, I wonder? A respectable woman like you letting a saddled tramp with no roots and no name defend your honor. I think my father would say that a man's worth is measured by his actions, not his station, Mercy replied, edging toward the side of the desk. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to lock up the schoolhouse. Vernon didn't move. Sheriff Briggs mentioned he found Quinn at your house yesterday. Alone with you, that's not the behavior of a respectable woman, Mercy. The sheriff also knows why Mr. Quinn was there, Mercy countered. To protect me from you and your friends. Vernon took another step toward her. You need protection, all right, but not from me. From your own foolish choices. He reached for her arm. Let me escort you home. We can continue this conversation in private. Mercy pulled the revolver from her pocket, pointing it at Vernon with a hand that trembled only slightly. Don't touch me. Vernon froze, his eyes widening in surprise before narrowing in anger. You wouldn't dare. I don't want to, Mercy admitted, but I will if you force me to. Now step aside and let me leave. For a long moment, Vernon didn't move and Mercy feared he might call her bluff. Then slowly, he backed toward the door. You've made a dangerous enemy, Mercy Jennings, he said softly. That gun won't protect you forever. Neither will your influence in this town, she replied, keeping the revolver trained on him as she edged toward the door. Vernon opened it and stepped outside, his face a mask of barely contained rage. This isn't over. It is for today, Mercy said, following him out and quickly locking the schoolhouse door behind her. She kept the gun visible as she moved toward the road that would lead her home, not turning her back on Vernon until she was well away from the schoolhouse. Her heart pounded in her chest as she walked quickly toward home, the revolver now hidden again in her pocket, but her hand wrapped firmly around it. She half expected to hear hoofbeats behind her at any moment, but none came. As her small house came into view, relief washed over her. She quickened her pace, eager for the safety of her own walls. She was nearly at her gate when she noticed the figure sitting on her porch steps. Forrest Quinn stood as she approached, his expression concerned. You're pale as a ghost, Mercy. What happened? Only then did she realize how badly she was shaking. Vernon Pike, she managed, at the schoolhouse. Forrest was immediately alert, his hand moving to his gun. Did he hurt you? Mercy shook her head, pulling the revolver from her pocket. No, your gift came in handy. Forrest's eyes widened slightly at the sight of the gun in her hand, then a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Seems I was right about your courage. Mercy let out a shaky breath, the events of the day catching up with her. I was terrified, she admitted. Being brave isn't about not feeling fear, Forrest said gently. It's about doing what's right despite it. He took the gun carefully from her trembling hand and guided her to sit on the porch steps. Tell me what happened. As Mercy recounted her encounter with Vernon, Forrest's expression darkened, but he remained silent until she had finished. Pike's a coward at heart, he said finally. But a coward backed into a corner is still dangerous. Mercy looked up at him. Why are you here now? I thought you were coming after sundown. Forrest's expression softened. Had a feeling, he said simply. Couldn't shake it all afternoon. Something in his tone made Mercy study his face more closely. There was concern there, certainly, but something else too, something that made her heart beat a little faster. I'm glad you came, she said softly. Forrest cleared his throat, suddenly looking a bit uncomfortable. I should check the area, make sure Pike didn't follow you. He stood, handing the revolver back to her. Keep this close, I'll be back before dark to set up camp. As he walked toward his horse, which was tethered to a tree at the edge of her property, Mercy called after him. Forrest, he turned. Thank you, she said simply. He nodded once, then mounted and rode off to circle her property. Mercy watched him go, Emma Wilcox's words echoing in her mind. He looks at you like Pa looks at Ma. She dismissed the thought with a shake of her head. She barely knew Forrest Quinn, and he was just being kind to a woman in distress. Nothing more still. As she entered her home and began preparing her evening meal, she couldn't help but wonder about the quiet cowboy who had come to her defense not once, but 3 times now. There was a depth to him that intrigued her, a sense that there was much more to his story than he had shared. As promised, Forrest returned as dusk was falling, leading his horse and carrying his bedroll and saddlebags. Mercy watched from her window as he set up a small, unobtrusive camp in a grove of trees about 100 yards from her house. Far enough for propriety, close enough to hear a call for help. When darkness fell completely, Mercy lit her lamps and sat by the fire with a book, though she found it difficult to concentrate on the words. Every so often, she would glance toward the window, comforted by the tiny pinprick of light that indicated Forrest's campfire. Eventually, she retired to bed, the revolver placed carefully on her nightstand. Despite the day's tensions, she fell asleep quickly, lulled by the knowledge that she wasn't completely alone. The next few days fell into an unexpected pattern. Mercy would go to town each morning to teach, and Forrest would ride to the Rocking M to work. In the evenings, he would return to his small camp near her property, sometimes bringing supplies from town or game he had hunted. They would share a meal on her porch, maintaining a proper distance for the sake of any watching eyes, and talk as the sun set. Mercy learned that Forrest had grown up in Missouri, the son of a horse breeder. He had fought for the Union during the war, though he spoke little of those years. After the war, he had worked his way west, never staying in one place for long. "What made you stop in White Pine?" she asked one evening as they sat on her porch steps, a respectful distance between them. Forrest considered the question, taking a sip of coffee before answering. "Horses," he said finally. "The Rocking M has some of the finest stock I've seen. Thought I could learn something here." Mercy sensed there was more to the story, but she didn't press. Instead, she shared stories of her own, of growing up in White Pine, of her parents and their dreams for the town, of her decision to become a teacher. "Your parents sound like good people," Forrest observed. "They were," Mercy agreed, a touch of melancholy in her voice. "My father believed in treating everyone with dignity, regardless of where they came from or what they looked like. He wouldn't recognize what White Pine has become." Forrest was quiet for a moment. "Towns, like people, can lose their way sometimes, and find it again?" Mercy asked. He met her eyes in the fading light. With the right guidance. There was something in his gaze that made Mercy's breath catch, and for a moment she thought he might reach for her hand. Instead, he stood, gathering their empty coffee cups. "It's getting late," he said, his voice a little rougher than usual. "You should get inside before the night chill sets in." Mercy nodded, standing as well. "Good night, Forrest." "Good night, Mercy," he replied, his use of her first name still new enough to send a small thrill through her. As she watched him walk back to his camp, Mercy acknowledged to herself what she had been trying to deny. She was developing feelings for Forrest Quinn that went beyond gratitude or friendship. It was foolish, perhaps even dangerous given the current tensions in White Pine, but her heart seemed unconcerned with such practical considerations. The following Sunday, Mercy dressed carefully for church, knowing that her weekly appearance at services was more important than ever. To avoid attending would only fuel the gossip that was already circulating about her and Forrest. He had offered to accompany her, but Mercy had gently refused. "It would only make things worse," she had explained. "Vernon has friends in the congregation, and your presence would be seen as a challenge." Though he had agreed, she could tell he was unhappy about her going alone. As a compromise, he rode into town ahead of her, saying he had business at the general store, but Mercy suspected he wanted to be nearby if trouble arose. The small white church was already filling with townspeople when Mercy arrived. She felt the weight of curious stares as she made her way to a pew near the back, where she had always sat with her parents. A few people nodded in greeting, but most averted their eyes or whispered behind their hands. Pastor Reynolds, a kindly man in his 60s who had known Mercy since she was a child, greeted her warmly at the door. "Good to see you, Miss Jennings." "Thank you, Pastor," she replied, drawing strength from his acceptance. The service proceeded normally, with hymns and prayers and Pastor Reynolds' sermon on the parable of the Good Samaritan, a choice that Mercy suspected was not coincidental. As the pastor spoke of the stranger who showed kindness when others passed by, she couldn't help but think of Forrest and his unexpected defense of her. After the service, as the congregation filed out into the churchyard, Mercy found herself approached by several of the mothers of her students who expressed their support. "Don't you mind Vernon Pike," Mrs. Wilcox said firmly. "My Emma thinks the world of you, and so do we." "Thank you," Mercy said, genuinely touched by the show of support. Not everyone was so kind, however. As she made her way through the churchyard, she overheard snippets of conversation. Living alone with that cowboy practically on her doorstep always was odd, even before her parents passed. Showing more interest in Indians than her own kind, Mercy held her head high, determined not to show how much the words hurt. She was nearly to the gate when Vernon Pike stepped into her path, his wife Loretta on his arm. Loretta was a thin, sour-faced woman who had never liked Mercy, even before the recent events. "Miss Jennings," Vernon greeted her with false cordiality. "A lovely service, wasn't it?" "The Good Samaritan's such an appropriate lesson." "Indeed," Mercy replied coolly. "If you'll excuse me." "Of course," Vernon said, not moving. "I was just telling Loretta how concerned I am about your situation. A young woman alone with unsavory characters showing interest. It's not safe." Loretta sniffed. "Hardly proper either." Mercy met Vernon's gaze steadily. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Pike, though I find it curious coming from someone who recently threatened me." Vernon's smile tightened. "A misunderstanding, as I've said. I only want what's best for you, Mercy." "Your father would expect me to look out for you." "My father," Mercy said clearly, aware that several people were listening, "taught me to judge people by their actions, not their words. Your actions have been quite instructive." Vernon's face darkened. "You should be careful about making enemies, Mercy, especially when you have so few friends left in White Pine." "She has more friends than you might think, Pike." The voice came from behind Mercy, and she turned to see Forrest approaching, his Sunday best slightly worn but clean and respectable. He stopped beside Mercy, not touching her but standing close enough to make his support clear. Vernon's eyes narrowed. "Church is for God-fearing folk, Quinn. Didn't take you for the religious type." "I have my beliefs," Forrest replied evenly. "One of them is that a man who threatens women isn't much of a man at all." Several of the churchgoers who had been pretending not to listen now watched openly, clearly interested in the confrontation. Vernon's face flushed with anger, but before he could respond, Pastor Reynolds appeared beside them. "A beautiful day the Lord has given us," the pastor said cheerfully, though his eyes were sharp as they moved between Vernon and Forrest. "Mr. Pike, I believe your wife was just telling Mrs. Henderson about the church social next weekend. Perhaps you could join them." It was a clear dismissal, and after a moment of tension, Vernon nodded stiffly. "Of course, Pastor." He shot a final glare at Forrest before moving away with Loretta. Pastor Reynolds turned to Mercy and Forrest. "Miss Jennings, it's always a pleasure to see you, and Mr. Quinn, I don't believe we've been formally introduced." "Forrest Quinn, sir," Forrest said, offering his hand. "I work at the Rockingham." "Ah, yes," Pastor Reynolds nodded. "Mr. Moncrief speaks highly of your way with horses." He looked between them, his expression thoughtful. "I hope we'll see you both at next Sunday's service." After the pastor moved on to greet other parishioners, Mercy turned to Forrest. "I thought you were staying at the general store." "Changed my mind," he said simply. "Thought you might appreciate some company on the walk home." Despite the curious stares they were attracting, Mercy felt a wave of gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. They left the churchyard together, maintaining a proper distance but clearly in each other's company. Mercy was acutely aware of the whispers that followed them, but for the first time since the incident with White Feather, she didn't feel alone in facing the town's judgment. "You didn't have to do that," she said as they walked down Main Street. "It will only fuel the gossip." Forrest glanced at her. "I'm not much concerned with gossip." "Easy for you to say," Mercy replied with a small smile. "You don't have to live here permanently." Something flickered across his face, an emotion Mercy couldn't quite identify. "No," he agreed after a moment. "I don't." They walked in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. As they passed the general store, the owner, Mr. Hargrove, called out to them, "Miss Jennings, Mr. Quinn, a moment if you please." They stopped, and Mr. Hargrove emerged from his store, a folded piece of paper in his hand. "Telegraph for you, Mr. Quinn," he said, holding out the paper. "Came yesterday, but I haven't seen you in town to deliver it." Forrest took the telegram, his expression unreadable as he scanned its contents. Mercy watched his face, noting the subtle tightening of his jaw. "Bad news?" she asked quietly when Mr. Hargrove had retreated to his store. Forrest folded the paper and tucked it into his pocket. "Not exactly," he said. "Just unexpected." He offered no further explanation, and Mercy didn't press, though curiosity burned within her. They resumed their walk. The atmosphere between them subtly changed. When they reached her house, Forrest hesitated at the gate. "I need to ride to the ranch," he said. "Business to attend to. I'll be back by nightfall." Mercy nodded, trying to ignore the disappointment that welled up at his sudden departure. "Of course." He tipped his hat and turned to go, then paused. "Mercy." "Yes." For a moment it seemed he might say something significant, but then he shook his head slightly. "Lock your doors. Keep the revolver close." With that, he strode to where his horse was tethered at the edge of her property, mounted, and rode away without looking back. Mercy watched him go, a sense of foreboding settling over her. Whatever had been in that telegram had changed something between them, and she couldn't shake the feeling that their peaceful routine of the past few days was about to be disrupted. True to his word, Forrest returned as dusk was falling, but something was different. He was quieter than usual as they shared a simple supper on her porch, and his eyes frequently scanned the darkening landscape as if looking for something or someone. "Is everything all right?" Mercy finally asked as they finished their meal. Forrest set down his plate, his expression serious. "That telegram was from an old friend in Kansas. He's a U.S. Marshal now." Mercy waited, sensing there was more to the story. "He's been tracking a man," Forrest continued. "A bank robber and murderer named James Blackwood. Trail led him to Colorado." He met her eyes. "To White Pine." Mercy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "Here? Why?" Forrest shook his head. "Not sure yet. Might just be passing through, might have other plans." He paused. "The marshal asked if I'd keep an eye out, let him know if I see or hear anything suspicious." "Is this man dangerous?" Mercy asked, though she already knew the answer. "Very," Forrest confirmed. "Killed 2 men during his last robbery in Kansas, shot them in cold blood." Mercy absorbed this information, understanding now why Forrest had seemed so distracted. "And your friend thinks he's here in White Pine, or nearby," Forrest nodded. "Blackwood has a distinctive scar across his right cheek, dark hair, blue eyes, about my height but heavier built." "I haven't seen anyone fitting that description," Mercy said thoughtfully. "Though I haven't been in town much lately, except for school and church." "Keep your eyes open," Forrest advised. "And be extra careful. If Blackwood is here, there's no telling what he might do or who might be helping him." The conversation turned to other topics after that, but the knowledge of a dangerous criminal possibly lurking in or near White Pine cast a shadow over their evening. When they parted for the night, Forrest's "be safe" carried more weight than usual. Mercy lay awake for some time that night, pondering this new development and what it might mean for the delicate balance that had been established between her and Forrest, and between them and the town. If a notorious criminal was indeed in White Pine, it could shift attention away from their situation, or it could make things more dangerous for everyone. She also wondered about Forrest's connection to the U.S. Marshal. He had called the man an old friend, but the way he spoke of the situation suggested a familiarity with law enforcement that went beyond casual acquaintance. It was yet another layer to the enigma that was Forrest Quinn. The next morning, Mercy set out for the schoolhouse as usual, her mind still preoccupied with thoughts of Forrest and the potential danger lurking in White Pine. She was so distracted that she almost missed the figure watching her from the shadows between two buildings as she passed through town. A flicker of movement caught her eye, and she turned to see a man she didn't recognize slipping into an alleyway. He was too far away for her to make out details, but something about his furtive movement set her nerves on edge. Mercy quickened her pace, relieved when she reached the schoolhouse to find several of her students already waiting. The routine of the school day helped calm her nerves, though she found herself glancing out the windows more often than usual, scanning the surrounding area for any sign of strangers. At midday, as the children played outside during their break, Sheriff Briggs rode up to the schoolhouse. His expression was more serious than Mercy had seen it in some time. "Miss Jennings," he greeted her, dismounting heavily. "Got a moment to talk?" "Of course, Sheriff," Mercy replied, gesturing to a bench beneath the large oak tree that shaded the schoolyard. "What can I help you with?" Briggs settled his bulk onto the bench, removing his hat to wipe sweat from his brow. "Received a wanted poster by telegraph yesterday," he said without preamble. "Dangerous man might be in these parts, name of James Blackwood." Mercy tried to keep her expression neutral, though her pulse quickened at the confirmation of what Forrest had told her. "That sounds concerning." "Very," Briggs agreed. "Wanted for bank robbery and murder in Kansas. Rewards substantial $500, dead or alive." "Dead or alive," Mercy echoed, a knot forming in her stomach. Briggs nodded grimly. "Man's dangerous, Miss Jennings, killed without hesitation." "I'm telling everyone to be on the lookout, especially those who live alone or outside of town." "Like me," Mercy said quietly. The sheriff had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Like you," he agreed. "I know we've had our differences regarding Pike and other matters, but this transcends local squabbles. If you see anything suspicious, anything at all, you send word immediately." "I will, Sheriff," Mercy promised. "Thank you for the warning." Briggs replaced his hat, standing with a grunt. "That cowboy friend of yours still camping on your property?" Mercy hesitated, then nodded. "Mr. Quinn has been kind enough to keep watch, given the recent troubles with Mr. Pike." To her surprise, Briggs didn't object. "Good," he said instead. "Having a man with a gun nearby isn't a bad idea right now." He paused, then added reluctantly, "Quinn seems capable enough." With that backhanded compliment, the sheriff took his leave, mounting his horse and continuing on his rounds to spread the warning about Blackwood. As Mercy called the children back to their lessons, her mind raced with implications. If even Sheriff Briggs was concerned enough to put aside his disapproval of her arrangement with Forrest, the threat must be substantial indeed. The afternoon dragged by, each hour feeling longer than the last as Mercy's anxiety grew. When the school day finally ended, she locked up quickly and set out for home, keeping a watchful eye on her surroundings. The revolver Forrest had given her was a reassuring weight in her pocket. As she approached her house, she was relieved to see smoke rising from Forrest's small campfire. He stood as she drew near, his expression a mix of concern and something else, something that made her heart beat faster despite the day's worries. "You heard about Blackwood?" he asked without preamble. Mercy nodded. "Sheriff Briggs came to the school. He's warning everyone." Forrest led her to her porch, his eyes constantly scanning the surrounding landscape. "I rode out to some of the outlying farms today," he said as they sat. "No one's seen anything suspicious, but people are nervous." "Did your marshal friend provide any more information?" Mercy asked. Forrest shook his head. "Just that Blackwood was seen in Denver last week and the trail led toward White Pine." He hesitated, then added, "There's something else you should know. Blackwood doesn't usually work alone. He has a partner, a man named Silas Reed." "Smaller man, nervous type with a lazy eye." Mercy thought back to the figure she'd glimpsed in town that morning. "I may have seen someone unfamiliar today," she said, describing the man she'd noticed slipping into the alleyway. Forrest's expression turned grim. "Could be Reed." "Did he see you notice him?" "I'm not sure," Mercy admitted. "I didn't get a good look at him." "Stay away from alleys and side streets," Forrest advised. "Stick to the main road where people can see you." Mercy nodded, then asked the question that had been bothering her all day. "Forrest, why would Blackwood come to White Pine? We're hardly a wealthy town, and our bank is small compared to Denver or even Colorado Springs." Forrest was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "Sometimes men like Blackwood choose targets based on more than just the potential take," he said finally. "Sometimes it's about how easy the job will be: small town, minimal law enforcement, unsuspecting citizens." His words painted a troubling picture, and Mercy found herself shivering despite the warm evening air. "What can we do?" "Be vigilant," Forrest replied, "and hope my friend catches up to Blackwood before he makes his move." They sat in silence for a time, watching as the sun sank lower behind the mountains, casting long shadows across Mercy's small property. The tranquility of the scene belied the tension that had settled between them. "You never mentioned your connection to the law before," Mercy observed eventually. Forrest glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Didn't seem relevant until now." "And is it just friendship that connects you to this marshal?" she pressed gently. "Or something more?" For a moment, Mercy thought he might not answer. Then he sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. "I rode with him during the war," Forrest said. "Afterwards, we both worked as deputies in Missouri for a time." He paused. "I left that life behind when I came west." "Why?" Mercy asked, genuinely curious. Forrest's eyes met hers, and there was a depth of emotion there that took her breath away. "Needed a fresh start," he said simply. "Too many ghosts back east." Mercy sensed there was much more to the story than he was telling, but she didn't push. Everyone had their secrets, their burdens to bear. If Forrest chose to share his with her someday, she would listen. Until then, she would respect his privacy. "Well, I'm glad you came to White Pine," she said softly, "despite all the trouble it's brought you." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Funny thing about trouble," he replied. "Sometimes it leads you places you never expected to go, places worth finding." The look that passed between them in that moment spoke volumes, conveying feelings that neither was quite ready to put into words. Mercy felt her cheeks warm, and she looked away first, flustered by the intensity of his gaze. "I should prepare supper," she said, standing perhaps a bit too quickly. Forrest stood as well. "I'll check the perimeter, make sure everything's secure." He hesitated, then added, "Be careful, Mercy. Blackwood is dangerous, but so is Pike in his own way. Don't underestimate either of them." With that warning, he set off to circle her property, leaving Mercy to ponder the growing complications in what had already been a difficult situation. The next few days passed in a state of heightened vigilance for the entire town of White Pine. Sheriff Briggs organized a citizen's watch, with men taking turns patrolling the streets at night. Forrest volunteered for a shift, which Mercy knew was as much to gather information as to help protect the town. Despite the tension, or perhaps because of it, Mercy found herself growing even closer to Forrest. Their evenings on her porch became a sanctuary of sorts, a time when they could set aside their worries and simply enjoy each other's company. They talked about books they had read, places they had seen, dreams they had harbored. Mercy learned that Forrest had a deep appreciation for poetry, particularly Walt Whitman, and that he could recite "When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard" bloomed from memory. He in turn discovered her love of astronomy, and one clear night they lay on a blanket in her yard, a respectable distance apart, as she pointed out constellations and told him the stories behind them. It was during one of these evening conversations, nearly a week after the news of Blackwood had reached White Pine, that Forrest finally opened up about his past in a way he hadn't before. "I killed my first man during the war," he said quietly, gazing into the flames of the small fire he had built. "He couldn't have been more than 18, Confederate cavalrymen who charged our position during a skirmish near the Tennessee border. I shot him off his horse at 20 paces." He looked up, meeting Mercy's eyes. "His face has stayed with me all these years." Mercy didn't speak, sensing he needed to continue without interruption. "After the war, I thought being a lawman would give me purpose," Forrest went on. "A way to use what I'd learned for something good. And for a while it did." He paused, his expression darkening. "Until Blackwood." Mercy's breath caught. "You've encountered him before," Forrest nodded, his jaw tight. "2 years ago, in a small town in Kansas called Millbrook. Blackwood and Reed robbed the bank there. I was deputy sheriff at the time." He stared into the fire, lost in memory. "They took hostages, a young woman and her little boy. When we cornered them outside of town, Blackwood shot the woman to create a distraction." "Dear God," Mercy whispered. "She lived," Forrest continued. "But the boy?" "He ran to his mother when she fell. Blackwood shot him too, 7 years old." His hand clenched into a fist. "I had a clear shot at Blackwood, but I hesitated, worried about hitting the boy. By the time I fired, Blackwood had moved. I only grazed him." "It wasn't your fault," Mercy said gently. Forrest looked at her, his eyes haunted. "The boy died in his mother's arms. I promised her I'd bring Blackwood to justice, but he escaped, disappeared into the territories." He took a deep breath. "I resigned my badge the next day, couldn't face the town, knowing I'd failed them." "So that's why your friend contacted you," Mercy realized. "He knows you have personal reasons for wanting to find Blackwood." Forrest nodded. "Tobias, that's the marshal, he understood why I left, but he never gave up the hunt. He's been tracking Blackwood for 2 years." Mercy reached out impulsively, laying her hand over Forrest's clenched fist. "You didn't fail, Forrest. You tried to protect an innocent child." His hand relaxed under hers, then turned to clasp her fingers. "I've never told anyone about that day," he admitted quietly. "Not the full story." The warmth of his hand around hers sent a flutter through Mercy's chest. "Thank you for trusting me with it." They sat like that, hands joined, for several long moments. The simple contact felt more intimate than any touch Mercy had experienced before, a connection that went beyond the physical. Finally, reluctantly, Forrest released her hand. "It's getting late," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "You should get some rest." Mercy nodded, standing. "Good night, Forrest." As she walked to her door, she heard his quiet reply, "Sweet dreams, Mercy." That night, as she prepared for bed, Mercy found herself dwelling on Forrest's revelations and what they meant for her growing feelings toward him. He had carried a heavy burden of guilt for 2 years, believing himself responsible for a child's death. Yet despite that pain, or perhaps because of it, he remained a man of principle and compassion. She was just drifting off to sleep when a noise from outside jerked her fully awake. It was a distinctive sound, the crack of a rifle shot, followed by a shout that she immediately recognized as Forrest's voice. Heart pounding, Mercy leapt from her bed and grabbed the revolver from her nightstand. She pulled on her robe as she moved to the window, peering out cautiously toward Forrest's camp. In the moonlight, she could make out several figures engaged in a struggle. Forrest was on his feet, grappling with a larger man, while a second figure circled them, apparently looking for an opening. Even from a distance, Mercy could see the glint of a knife in the larger man's hand. Without hesitation, she rushed to her front door, revolver in hand. She stepped onto her porch, took careful aim at the night sky, and fired a warning shot. The loud report froze the combatants momentarily. In that instant of distraction, Forrest broke away from his attacker, drawing his own gun in a fluid motion. "Mercy, get back inside," he shouted, not taking his eyes off the 2 men. Instead, she kept the revolver raised, moving down her porch steps. "I've got them covered, Forrest." The larger man laughed, a chilling sound in the night. Well, the little lady's got spirit." He turned slightly, and in the moonlight, Mercy could see a long scar running down his right cheek. "You must be the schoolteacher I've been hearing about." "Blackwood," Mercy breathed, recognition dawning. "James Blackwood at your service," he replied with a mocking bow. "And my associate, Mr. Reed." He gestured to the smaller man who watched Mercy with nervous eyes, one of which, she now noticed, didn't quite track with the other. "What do you want?" Forrest demanded, his gun steady on Blackwood. "Now, that's not a friendly welcome," Blackwood said, his tone conversational despite the tension of the standoff. "Especially from an old acquaintance." His eyes narrowed. "You've changed your look, Deputy Quinn, but I never forget a face, especially one that put a bullet in me." Mercy felt a chill at the confirmation that Blackwood had recognized Forrest. "You're not welcome here," Forrest stated flatly. "Leave now and no one needs to get hurt." Blackwood chuckled. Always the noble lawman, even without the badge. He took a step forward and Forrest's gun didn't waver. "We've got business in White Pine, Quinn, unfinished business, and I'm not about to let you interfere this time." "Whatever you're planning, it won't work," Forrest said. "The town's on alert. Sheriff Briggs has men patrolling the streets." "That fat excuse for a lawman," Blackwood scoffed. "He wouldn't know a real criminal if one slapped him across the face." His expression darkened. "No, our business isn't with the law, it's with someone who owes us." Mercy's mind raced. Who in White Pine could possibly have a connection to a man like Blackwood? "This town's under my protection," Forrest stated firmly. "You'd be wise to move on." Blackwood's smile was cold. "Your protection?" He glanced at Mercy. "Seems to me you're more interested in protecting the lady's virtue than the town's gold." His hand moved slightly, and Mercy saw the moonlight glint off the blade he still held. "Tell you what, Quinn. You forget you saw us tonight, and we'll leave the pretty schoolteacher alone when we finish our business. That's more consideration than you showed for that woman and her brat in Millbrook." Mercy saw Forrest tense at the deliberate provocation, and she feared he might do something rash. "Forrest," she called softly, "he's baiting you." Her voice seemed to steady him, and he gave a nearly imperceptible nod without taking his eyes off Blackwood. "Last chance," Forrest said evenly. "Leave town now or I'll bring you in dead or alive. Your choice." The standoff stretched for several tense heartbeats, then Blackwood laughed again. "Always the hero," he said mockingly, "but heroes have a habit of dying young, Quinn. Remember that." He backed away slowly, gesturing for Reed to do the same. "We'll be seeing you again, both of you." The two men retreated into the darkness, disappearing among the trees at the edge of Mercy's property. Forrest kept his gun trained on the spot where they had vanished for several long moments, then quickly moved to Mercy's side. "Are you all right?" he asked urgently, his free hand gently gripping her arm as his eyes scanned her for any sign of injury. "I'm fine," she assured him. "What about you? I heard a shot." "Fired into my bedroll," Forrest explained grimly. "They thought I was sleeping, if I hadn't been keeping watch from those trees." He didn't finish the thought, but Mercy understood the implication. "We need to warn the sheriff," she said. Forrest nodded. "I'll ride into town now." "Now, it's the middle of the night. Blackwood won't wait until morning," Forrest replied, already moving toward his horse. "Whatever he's planning, he'll want to move quickly now that he knows I've recognized him." Mercy hurried after him. "I'm coming with you." Forrest turned, his expression serious. "It's not safe." "It's not safe here alone either," she countered. "You said yourself that Blackwood might target me to get to you." Forrest hesitated, clearly torn between the need to alert the town and his desire to protect her. "I can ride," Mercy added. "And I still have the revolver. We'll be safer together." After another moment's consideration, Forrest nodded. "Get dressed quickly. Bring only what you need." Within minutes, Mercy had changed into a simple riding dress and gathered a few essentials. Forrest helped her mount his gelding, then swung up behind her. The closeness of their bodies as they rode toward town was both unsettling and comforting to Mercy. She could feel the solid strength of his chest against her back, his arms on either side of her as he held the reins. The town was quiet as they arrived, most buildings dark except for the saloon, where a few lights still burned. Forrest guided the horse directly to the sheriff's office, where a lamp was visible in the window. Sheriff Briggs was dozing at his desk when they entered, jerking awake at the sound of the door. "Quinn, Miss Jennings," he blinked in confusion, taking in their appearance. "What in tarnation are you doing here at this hour, Blackwood?" Forrest said without preamble. "He was at Mercy's property tonight, he and his partner Reed. That woke the sheriff fully." "You're certain?" "I saw the scar myself," Mercy confirmed, and he recognized Forrest from their previous encounter in Kansas. Briggs stood, reaching for his gun belt. What did he want? "Said they have business in White Pine," Forrest replied. "With someone who owes them." The sheriff's brow furrowed. "Who in White Pine would have dealings with a man like Blackwood?" "That's what we need to find out," Forrest said grimly. He mentioned the town's gold. "Could be planning to rob the bank or maybe the assay office." Briggs shook his head. "There's not enough in either place to interest a man of Blackwood's reputation. The monthly shipment from the mines doesn't arrive until next week." He thought for a moment. "Could be he meant someone's personal holdings. A few of our citizens keep substantial sums at home, not trusting banks." "Who?" Forrest asked. The sheriff hesitated. "Can't rightly say, would be a breach of confidence." "People could die, Sheriff," Mercy interjected. "If you know something that could help." Briggs sighed heavily. "There's Widow Tanner, who keeps her late husband's savings in a strongbox under her bed, old man Jeffries from the hardware store, and—" He paused. "And," Forrest prompted, "Pike," Briggs admitted reluctantly. "Vernon keeps a safe in his office at the saloon. Common knowledge that he doesn't trust banks since the Panic of '73 wiped out his brother's savings back east." Mercy and Forrest exchanged a glance, both thinking the same thing. Vernon Pike's saloon was one of the few businesses still lit at this late hour. "We should check on the saloon first," Forrest suggested. "It's closest and still active." Briggs nodded, buckling on his gun belt. "I'll rouse Deputy Willis to keep an eye on Miss Jennings while we investigate." "I'm coming with you," Mercy stated firmly. Both men looked at her in surprise. "Miss Jennings, this is no place for a lady," Briggs began. "With all due respect, Sheriff," Mercy interrupted, "I've already encountered Blackwood once tonight. I know what he looks like and he knows me. I might notice something you miss." Forrest studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "She's right," he told Briggs. "But she stays outside, watches the back exit. If Blackwood or Reed try to leave that way, she fires a warning shot." The sheriff looked like he wanted to argue further, but time was of the essence. "Fine," he conceded. "But at the first sign of real trouble, you run for help, Miss Jennings." "Understood, understood," Mercy agreed, though she had no intention of abandoning Forrest if he needed her. They left the sheriff's office, moving carefully through the darkened streets toward the saloon. As they neared the building, Forrest touched Mercy's arm. "Remember what I told you about Blackwood," he said quietly. "He's cold-blooded, won't hesitate to kill. If you see him, don't engage, just fire the warning shot and take cover. Promise me?" Mercy nodded, touched by his concern. "I promise." "Be careful," he added, his hand lingering on her arm for a moment longer than necessary. "You too," she replied softly. With a final nod, Forrest and Sheriff Briggs moved toward the front entrance of the saloon while Mercy circled around to the rear of the building. She positioned herself in the shadows of an adjacent structure, revolver ready, eyes fixed on the back door. From inside, she could hear the muffled sounds of late-night revelry laughter, the plinking of a poorly tuned piano, occasional shouts as cards were played and bets were won or lost. Nothing seemed amiss, but Mercy remained vigilant, remembering Forrest's warnings about Blackwood's ruthlessness. Several tense minutes passed. Mercy was beginning to wonder if they had guessed wrong when the back door suddenly opened, spilling light into the dark alley. She pressed deeper into the shadows, watching as a figure emerged, not Blackwood or Reed, but Vernon Pike himself. He glanced around furtively, then moved toward a small shed attached to the rear of the saloon. Mercy held her position, uncertain whether to alert Forrest or continue watching. Before she could decide, the shed door opened, and Vernon emerged with another man, a man Mercy recognized immediately as Silas Reed, her breath caught. Vernon was involved with Blackwood somehow. She raised the revolver, prepared to fire the warning shot as agreed, when a voice spoke directly behind her. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Miss Jennings." Mercy froze, feeling the unmistakable pressure of a gun barrel against her back. James Blackwood's voice was as cold as it had been at her property, but now held a note of satisfaction. "Drop the revolver," he ordered. "Nice and easy." Mercy hesitated, her mind racing. If she fired, she'd alert Forrest but might be shot herself. If she complied, she'd be at Blackwood's mercy. "I won't ask again," Blackwood said, pressing the gun harder against her spine. Slowly, reluctantly, Mercy lowered the revolver and let it fall to the ground. "Good girl," Blackwood said, grabbing her arm roughly. "Now let's go join the party, shall we? Your friend Pike's been expecting us." He propelled her forward, toward Vernon and Reed, who had noticed their approach and were watching with varying expressions. Reed nervous, Vernon surprised and then calculating. "Found this one lurking in the shadows," Blackwood announced as they reached the other men. "Seems Quinn's brought reinforcements." Vernon's eyes narrowed as they fell on Mercy. "Miss Jennings, always turning up where you're not wanted." "You're working with them," Mercy said, the pieces falling into place. "With murderers," Vernon's face hardened. "Business is business, my dear. And my business is my own concern." "What about the town's safety?" Mercy demanded. "These men are killers, Vernon. Keep your voice down," Reed hissed, glancing nervously toward the saloon. Blackwood's grip on Mercy's arm tightened painfully. "Where's Quinn?" he asked. "Inside," she replied, seeing no reason to lie about what Blackwood would soon discover anyway. "With the sheriff," Vernon cursed under his breath. "This complicates things." "Not necessarily," Blackwood said coolly. "In fact, it might work to our advantage." He turned to Vernon. "Is everything prepared?" Vernon nodded. "Safes open, money's divided as agreed." "Good." Blackwood's attention returned to Mercy. "Now, Miss Jennings, you're going to help ensure that everyone cooperates. A schoolteacher hostage should keep Quinn and the sheriff in line while we conclude our business." Mercy's heart raced as Blackwood began dragging her toward the back door of the saloon. She had to warn Forrest somehow, let him know that Vernon was involved. Just as they reached the door, it burst open and Forrest appeared, gun drawn. He took in the scene in an instant, Mercy in Blackwood's grip, Vernon standing with Reed, the shed door open behind them. "Let her go, Blackwood," Forrest demanded, his gun aimed steadily at the outlaw's head. Blackwood laughed, using Mercy as a shield. "Not likely, Quinn, not when she's my ticket out of here." He pressed his gun to Mercy's temple. "Drop your weapon or the lady dies." Mercy could see the conflict in Forrest's eyes, the lawman in him wanting to take the shot, the man who cared for her unwilling to risk her life. "Don't do it, Forrest," she urged. "He'll kill us both anyway." "Brave words," Blackwood remarked, "but are you willing to die for them?" He cocked the hammer of his gun, the click unnaturally loud in the tense silence. "Wait," Forrest said, slowly lowering his gun. "Let's talk about this." "Nothing to talk about," Blackwood replied. "Drop the gun and kick it over here, now." After a moment of hesitation, Forrest complied, placing his revolver on the ground and kicking it toward Blackwood. "Where's the sheriff?" Blackwood asked. "Inside," Forrest answered. "Checking the front rooms." Vernon stepped forward. "We need to move quickly," he said urgently. "Get the money and go before Briggs comes looking." Blackwood nodded. "Reed, get the bags from the shed. Pike, watch Quinn." He backed toward the door, dragging Mercy with him. "One wrong move, Quinn, and she dies." As Reed scurried to the shed, Mercy caught Forrest's eye. She gave a barely perceptible nod toward Vernon, who was standing slightly to the side, his own gun now trained on Forrest. Forrest's eyes flickered in acknowledgement, understanding her silent message. Reed emerged from the shed, struggling with 2 heavy canvas bags. "Got it," he announced. "Good," Blackwood said. "Now he never finished the sentence." With a swift movement, Mercy drove her elbow hard into Blackwood's ribs, simultaneously ducking to the side. The gun at her temple discharged, the bullet whistling past her ear as she broke free from his grip. In the same instant, Forrest lunged toward Vernon, tackling him before he could react. The two men crashed to the ground, grappling for Vernon's gun. Blackwood recovered quickly, raising his gun toward Mercy, but before he could fire, the back door of the saloon burst open again. Sheriff Briggs appeared, his shotgun leveled at Blackwood. "Drop it, Blackwood," the sheriff commanded. For a heartbeat, it seemed Blackwood might comply. Then, with lightning speed, he swung his gun toward Briggs and fired. The sheriff staggered, the shotgun discharging harmlessly into the air as he fell. Forrest, having wrestled the gun from Vernon's grasp, rolled to his feet and fired in one fluid motion. His bullet caught Blackwood in the shoulder, spinning him around but not stopping him. The outlaw returned fire, forcing Forrest to dive for cover. Reed, panicking at the sudden violence, dropped the money bags and bolted for the street, disappearing into the night. Vernon, momentarily forgotten in the chaos, scrambled for his fallen gun. Mercy, seeing the danger, kicked the weapon away before Vernon could reach it. He snarled, lunging at her with unexpected speed. His weight knocked her backward and they fell together, Vernon's hands closing around her throat. "You've ruined everything," he hissed, his face contorted with rage as he tightened his grip. Mercy fought desperately, clawing at his hands, her vision starting to darken at the edges. Through the roaring in her ears, she heard more gunshots, but they seemed distant, unimportant compared to the immediate struggle for breath. Then suddenly, Vernon's weight was gone. Mercy gasped, air rushing painfully into her lungs as she rolled to her side, coughing. Through watering eyes, she saw Forrest standing over Vernon's prone form, the butt of his gun bloody from where he'd struck the saloon owner. "Mercy," Forrest knelt beside her, his face etched with concern. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, still unable to speak, pointing instead toward Sheriff Briggs, who lay motionless near the saloon door. Forrest moved quickly to the sheriff's side, checking for signs of life. "He's alive," he reported with relief. "Shot in the shoulder, but it doesn't look fatal." A groan from nearby drew their attention. Blackwood was pulling himself to his feet, his left arm hanging useless at his side, his right still gripping his gun. Blood soaked his shirt from the shoulder wound Forrest had inflicted. "This isn't over, Quinn," he rasped, raising his gun with visible effort. Mercy, her voice still not working properly, pointed desperately to warn Forrest. He spun, raising his own weapon, and two shots rang out simultaneously. Blackwood staggered, a look of surprise crossing his face as a red stain blossomed on his chest. He took one stumbling step forward, then collapsed, his gun clattering to the ground. Forrest moved cautiously to the fallen outlaw, kicking the gun well out of reach before checking for a pulse. After a moment, he looked up at Mercy and shook his head. "He's gone," Forrest said quietly. The back door of the saloon flew open once more and several patrons spilled out, drawn by the gunfire. Among them was Dr. Holloway, who immediately took charge of the wounded sheriff, barking orders for help to carry him to the doctor's office. Vernon, regaining consciousness, was secured with rope fetched from the saloon stable. His protestations of innocence fell on deaf ears, as the evidence of his collusion with Blackwood was all too clear. Through it all, Mercy sat where Forrest had left her, watching the aftermath of violence unfold with a strange sense of detachment. It wasn't until Forrest returned to her side, gently helping her to her feet, that the reality of what had happened began to sink in. "Reed got away," she managed to say, her voice hoarse from Vernon's assault. "For now," Forrest replied, "but without Blackwood he won't get far. Every lawman in Colorado will be looking for him." He guided her away from the growing crowd, finding a quiet spot at the side of the building where they could have a moment of privacy. Carefully, he examined the bruises forming on her neck, his touch light as a feather. "You need to see the doctor," he said, concern evident in his voice. Mercy shook her head. "The sheriff needs him more. I'll be fine." Forrest's eyes searched hers, looking for confirmation of her words. "You were incredibly brave," he said softly. "Reckless, but brave." Despite everything, Mercy felt a smile tug at her lips. "I learned from the best." His answering smile was brief, quickly replaced by a more serious expression. "I nearly lost you tonight," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "when Blackwood had that gun to your head. I've never been so scared in my life." The raw emotion in his voice sent a shiver through Mercy that had nothing to do with the night air or her recent ordeal. "I knew you wouldn't let him hurt me," she replied, surprised by her own certainty. "I should never have let you come," Forrest said, shaking his head. "If something had happened to you, but it didn't," Mercy interrupted gently. "We're both here. We're both alive." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the unspoken feelings between them strengthening in the wake of shared danger. Then, with exquisite slowness, Forrest leaned forward, giving her every chance to pull away. Mercy didn't move, her heart hammering in her chest as his lips met hers in a kiss that was both gentle and searingly intense. His hand came up to cup her face, careful to avoid the tender bruises on her neck, and Mercy found herself leaning into his touch, returning the kiss with a fervor that surprised her. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Forrest rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment you stood up to Pike in the street," he admitted. Mercy smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with embarrassment. "I'm glad you finally did." Their moment of intimacy was interrupted by the approach of footsteps. They separated reluctantly as Deputy Willis rounded the corner. "Miss Jennings," the young deputy said, touching his hat respectfully. "Doctor wants to check you over when he's done with the sheriff, and we'll need statements from both of you about what happened." "Of course," Mercy replied. "How is Sheriff Briggs?" "Doc says he'll make it," Willis reported. "Bullet went clean through, didn't hit anything vital." "And Pike?" Forrest asked. "Locked up tight," the deputy assured them. "Screaming about his rights, but nobody's paying him much mind, not after what he did." Forrest nodded, then turned to Mercy. "Let me take you to the doctor's office." As they walked through the now bustling streets of White Pine, Mercy was aware of the curious stares and whispers that followed them. But for once, she didn't feel the sting of judgment in those glances. Instead, there was a new respect and perhaps even a touch of admiration. Word of what had happened spread quickly, and by the time they reached Dr. Holloway's office, several townspeople had approached them with words of gratitude and support. Even Mrs. Pike, upon learning of her husband's treachery, had stopped Mercy to express her shock and regret. "I never thought Vernon capable of such wickedness," the older woman had said, her thin face pale with distress. "To think he was consorting with murderers, all for money." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity in White Pine. Sheriff Briggs recovered slowly but steadily. Silas Reed was captured trying to steal a horse from a farm outside of town, and Vernon Pike was charged with aiding and abetting known criminals, as well as attempted murder for his attack on Mercy. Throughout it all, Forrest remained by Mercy's side, a steady presence that the town gradually came to accept and even appreciate. His role in stopping Blackwood had transformed him from suspicious outsider to local hero in the eyes of many. 1 week after the confrontation behind the saloon, Mercy stood on her porch, watching as Forrest dismounted after a day's work at the Rockingham. The sight of him riding toward her house still brought a flutter to her heart, though he had long since moved his camp back to the ranch bunkhouse now that the threat from both Blackwood and Pike had been eliminated. "Good evening," she called as he approached, noting the unusual formality of his attire. He had exchanged his work clothes for a clean shirt and his best trousers, and his hair was neatly combed. "You look handsome." Forrest smiled, a hint of nervousness in his expression as he mounted the steps to join her on the porch. "Thank you. I wanted to look presentable for this conversation." Mercy raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "That sounds serious." "It is," he agreed, removing his hat and turning it in his hands, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. "I received a telegram from Tobias the marshal this morning." Mercy's heart sank. He wants you to join him, to help track other criminals. Forrest shook his head. No, he offered me a position as a deputy U.S. Marshal, said my work with Blackwood proved I still have what it takes. Oh, Mercy said softly, trying to hide her disappointment. That's a great honor. When do you leave? Forrest met her eyes directly. I turned it down. Mercy blinked in surprise. You did, but I thought. Your friendship with him, your history as a lawman. I've found something more important here, Forrest said quietly. Something I wasn't looking for but can't imagine walking away from. The intensity of his gaze left no doubt as to his meaning, and Mercy felt her cheeks flush with pleasure. And what would that be, Mr. Quinn? She asked, unable to resist teasing him a little. Forrest stepped closer, setting his hat aside to take her hands in his. You know very well, Miss Jennings. His thumbs traced small circles on the backs of her hands. I came to White Pine looking for a fresh start, but I found something I never expected, a woman whose kindness and courage remind me every day of what's truly important in this world. Mercy's heart soared at his words, but she couldn't help one last question. And the ghosts you were running from, the guilt over what happened in Millbrook, still there, Forrest admitted honestly. Some ghosts never fully disappear, but they don't haunt me the way they used to. He smiled softly. Someone wise once showed me that kindness is the bravest thing left in this world, and that kind of bravery, it heals wounds even time can't touch. Mercy squeezed his hands. So you're staying in White Pine, if you'll have me, Forrest replied. Mr. Moncrief has offered me a permanent position as foreman at the Rockingham. It's good, steady work. I think that sounds wonderful, Mercy said, her smile radiant. Forrest took a deep breath. There's something else, Mercy, something I need to ask you. He hesitated, then dropped to one knee, still holding her hands in his. I know it hasn't been long and maybe this is too forward, but when a man my age finds what I've found with you, he doesn't waste time. Mercy's breath caught as she realized what was happening. I love you, Forrest said simply. Your kindness, your courage, your unwavering sense of right and wrong. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me. Mercy Jennings, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? For a moment, Mercy was too overwhelmed to speak. Then, with tears of joy shining in her eyes, she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Forrest Quinn, I will marry you. With a smile that lit his entire face, Forrest rose and gathered her in his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and partnership. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the small white church of White Pine, with Pastor Reynolds officiating. The entire town turned out for the celebration, the recent events having united the community in a way that seemed impossible just months earlier. Even Sheriff Briggs, his arm still in a sling but otherwise recovered, offered his congratulations with genuine warmth. You've got yourself a fine woman there, Quinn, he told Forrest at the reception. And she's got a good man. I was wrong about you, and I'm man enough to admit it. The young students from Mercy's school had decorated the church hall with wildflowers and ribbons, and Emma Wilcox served as flower girl, beaming with pride as she preceded Mercy down the aisle. White Feather, the elderly Ute woman whose collapse had started the chain of events that brought Mercy and Forrest together, attended the ceremony as a special guest of the bride. Her presence was a testament to the changes beginning to take root in White Pine's small steps toward understanding and acceptance that Mercy and Forrest hoped would continue to grow. As they shared their first dance as husband and wife, Forrest held Mercy close, his eyes never leaving hers. Happy. He asked softly, more than I ever thought possible, she replied. And you? Forrest's smile was answer enough, but he added, I came to White Pine looking for peace and found the other half of my soul instead. Later that night, as they stood on the porch of what was now their home, gazing up at the star-filled sky, Mercy reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that first encounter on Main Street, when she had been spat upon for showing kindness to a stranger, to the love and respect she now shared with the man at her side, it had been a path filled with danger and discovery. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Quinn?" Forrest asked, his arm warm around her waist. Mercy leaned into his embrace, savoring the newness of her married name. "I was thinking about what you said that day in town when Vernon spat on me, about kindness being the bravest thing left." Forrest nodded, remembering. "I believed it then. I believe it even more now." "It changed everything," Mercy mused. "That simple act of helping White Feather and your defense of it, if none of that had happened." "We still would have found each other," Forrest said with quiet certainty. "Some things are meant to be, Mercy." "I believe that with all my heart." As they stood together, wrapped in each other's arms beneath the vast Colorado sky, Mercy knew he was right. Their love had been forged in moments of courage and kindness, tested by danger and prejudice, and had emerged stronger for the trials it had faced. Whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together, with the same bravery that had brought them to this moment of perfect happiness. In the years that followed, White Pine changed gradually but significantly. Mercy continued teaching, though after the birth of their first child, a son they named William after her father, she reduced her hours to part-time. Forrest thrived as foreman of the Rockingham, eventually saving enough to purchase a small ranch of their own on the outskirts of town, where they raised William and, 2 years later, a daughter they named Elizabeth. The incident with Blackwood and Pike became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what could happen when greed and prejudice went unchecked. But it also became a story of redemption and community, of how a town could come together in the face of danger and emerge stronger. As for Mercy and Forrest, their love remained a beacon in White Pine, a testament to the power of kindness and courage in a world that often seemed to value neither. They raised their children to believe in both, to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult, and to recognize that sometimes the bravest thing one could do was simply to be kind. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep, and they sat together on their porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in hues of gold and purple, Mercy would sometimes take Forrest's hand and say, "I'm still glad you thought kindness was brave." And Forrest, his eyes reflecting the same love they had shown on that first day in White Pine, would squeeze her hand and reply, "It still is, my love. It always will be."